Okay, hello and welcome back to the Novice Lumberjack, where we're going to talk a little bit about piston slap. Now, I have this here, Red 625 dose, and I did a video of it running, I think it was yesterday, and it runs excellent. But there's this noise that it keeps on making, and if you guys watch the channel, what you will know is that I do have a lot of knowledge in my head, but I don't have a whole lot of experience. And so I could hear that pinging, knocking noise as I was running the 625. And I was like, what is that? Is that, is that a rod bearing? Is that the wrist pin bearing, And my mind never even went to think about piston slap, because as much as I know about piston slap, I have never personally experienced it until I think yesterday, whenever I ran the Red 625. So we won't know for sure until we tear into it, which I will after this video. But before it happens, I want to talk about piston slap. Piston slap is whenever your piston is too small. It has worn out, right? Over the years, it has worn on the piston skirt specifically because of all of the movements up and down the strokes in the engine. Right? Wear happens. We do what we can. We have good lubrication and stuff, but it still happens. It doesn't matter what you're running. But there's a very specific reason of why piston slap only happens on the intake side. All right? I want you to watch. This is my little trainer right here. This is a Poland, what is it? 3816 or something like that. It's I can't remember what they called them, but it's a wild thing, basically. So what I want you to notice here is as I rotate the engine in the direction that it is made to rotate, okay? It is spinning and cutting wood right here. Watch where my rod hits. Now we're going up, and it's on the exhaust side. Now we're going down, and it's on the intake side. Boom. Exhaust side, boom. With me? Exhaust, intake. Exhaust, intake. Exhaust, intake. Pretty sweet, huh? Why is it doing that? On the on the upstroke, it's on the exhaust side. On the upstroke, there's no power being created. So there's very minimal pressure on the exhaust side. But on the downstroke, that's where all your power is created. So you get a really harsh pow right over onto the intake side. And all of that pressure of that combustion, that explosion that's happening on top of the piston, is being driven into the intake side of your cylinder. So this is why piston slap only really takes place on the intake side. It's because that is your thrust side. That is the thrust side of your piston. Whenever that force is pushing that piston down, the rod, because it's on this circular crank, very naturally, bam, pushes towards your intake side. Now let's say you had this thing set up to run in the opposite direction, right? Now we're spinning backwards. The downstroke is on the exhaust side, and the upstroke is on the intake side. So that completely flip-flops the dynamic. Your downstroke is always going to be your power stroke, and that's whenever you're pushing the piston down, and if you're running in the opposite direction, Then the exhaust side becomes your thrust side. That's the side that is taking the hit of all that power. Very little of that hit is happening on the non-thrust side. So in normal operation, we're going up at your exhaust side, no pressure on it. Boom! We get that explosion, and all the pressure is being pushed onto your intake side. And so that sound that I'm hearing whenever I'm running the 625 Johnson Red is that. Now, it's not coming from the rod, hopefully. Hopefully, it's coming from a piston that is too small. As a matter of fact, let's see if we can find... Nah, I'd have to take this thing all apart. This piston's not small enough. It's not worn out. But you would see if it had a smaller piston, the piston would be smacking back and forth against the walls, just like this is. So that is what piston slap is, but more importantly, we know why it is only on one side of the engine. It's on your thrust side, and your thrust side is the side in which your piston gets pushed to whenever combustion takes place and that piston is driven down. And if you have slop in that piston to cylinder wall contact, if you have slop there, whenever that happens, bink, you hear it. You hear it smacking the cylinder walls. That's piston slap. And it only happens on your intake side.